quick question before we start. Does your brain ever get super excited about making a very detailed plan, only for another part of your brain to get all grumpy and say, "Can we repot all the plans now?" Yeah? Then you're in the right place. You're listening to the Spacious Brain podcast, where real neurodivergent humans with real jobs and real daily chaos overshare with pride. Minus the glossy, my ADHD is my superpower nonsense. Hi, I'm Noemi, a scientist, a neurodiversity coach. Yes, someone who will absolutely derail into a story from when I was 12 because I'm ADHD and tangents are my love language. If you ever felt alone or felt like the Temu version of neurodivergent because you're not an entrepreneur, not a CEO, and you forget to eat and drink on the same day, you're in the right place. Let's keep this real. In this episode, I'm joined by Dhruti, an ADHD life and workplace coach who received their ADHD diagnosis at 36. Dhruti had spent years wondering why she could solve complex problems, remain calm during a crisis, and throw herself brilliantly into new roles, all while struggling with tasks that seemed effortless for everyone else. Together, we explore the layers that shaped their experience, including growing up British Indian, the pressure to be a good and successful girl, career changes, chronic pain, relationships, and the slow process of learning to trust yourself. Dhruti, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, Noemi. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. And I'll start with the usual question that brings a lot of weight, which is, who is Dhru?
Drew is full name Dhruti, but nickname Drew. And I am an ADHD coach and ADHD life coach and ADHD workplace coach. I am an Indian. I grew up in the UK. I was born in the UK and I was diagnosed with ADHD I can't remember the year, but I was 36 years old when I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I also have some of the other conditions that come along or more recently have been discovered to come along with ADHD, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I suspect I'm autistic, but I don't have a diagnosis or anything official to say that.
And I'll start with the ADHD diagnosis. We will go back to the autism suspicion because we're in the same boat. So I would like to explore that together a little bit. But you were diagnosed at 36. So the question that I have is, what brought you to seek a diagnosis that late in life? But also what happened during the process of the diagnosis, and then what happened after. So before, in between, and after.
Okay, well, I think like a lot of people, I had no idea that I could even possibly have ADHD. And I think I was around 33-ish when I started a new job, and there were some people there who spoke openly about it, women who spoke openly about it. And I found myself being able to relate to what they were saying, and also just to memes on Instagram. Like the ADHD memes were so relatable. And I also had a friend who had kind of asked me if maybe, would I consider the idea that I could have ADHD. And I kind of laughed at him, to be honest. I was like, there's no way. I'm such a tired person. I have no energy. This is not an ADHD person, because my understanding of it was that I should be, the classic idea that we have.
Bouncing off the walls.
Bouncing off the walls, exactly. And so when I did start really considering it, what I wanted to do is go to the GP and say, I think this is a thing, chuck me on the waiting list, let's figure it out. But of course I have ADHD, so I did not do that. And 2.5 years later, I started to get sick. It was almost unidentifiable. Different things were explored, including perimenopause, which was a shock because I was 35 years old. And eventually, I was made redundant, which was not to do necessarily with the ADHD, but I do suspect that it didn't help. I found myself being able to cope just less and less, even with regular things that I could do with my eyes closed before. And it got to a point where I was so unwell that I didn't have time anymore to go on a waiting list. I had to I'd just been made redundant, but I accepted that this was going to be the best thing I ever buy for myself was an ADHD assessment, a private assessment. So I went through the thing and, you have to ask someone who knows you really well to write a profile or something like that. And then my mum had to write something. And this whole time, as much as I was reading more about it and thinking, yes, I relate to that. That makes sense. That explains this. Really, truly inside me, I could not accept that it was because of that I have made a mess of everything. So when the diagnosis came, initially, I was kind of gaslighting myself. Like, did I just say all of the right things to make sure that they give me this diagnosis? And of course I hadn't. It was factual. It was the things that have happened in life and how I cope with things and everything like that. And I think once that initial part of me thinking I've somehow tricked this person into giving me a diagnosis was over, it turned into like hope and relief. Still, so I didn't have necessarily that validation that people get because I didn't truly let myself believe that I had it. And I think the hope was just, okay, it doesn't have to stay this way forever. It got to a point where I couldn't understand how I would be able to spend the next however many decades of life functioning how I was functioning now. Because the thought of that was kind of infuriating because I was angry all the time. I was angry all the time at myself every day, multiple times a day. And the idea that actually I don't have to live the rest of my life like that just gave me a lot of hope.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing it so openly because the part about gaslighting yourself is the one that I feel very deeply because I did it to myself as well when I was going through the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And funny enough, like that happened when I was talking to the psychiatrist and I was tuning it down quite a lot. I was like, oh, yeah, she asked me something like, were you doing this when you were a child? And I was like, yeah, I was doing that, but it was because of that. And all of a sudden she stopped me and she was like, do you realize that that is not normal for somebody of 6 years old to have these mechanisms in place?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not? I said, no? Oh, eh? Okay. So I think that was my first moment where I was like, so maybe I'm not tricking anybody here.
Yeah. There are so many of those things that I'm like, oh, everyone doesn't do that? What do you mean? And we've just built up all of these ways of dealing and coping that we consider to be things that everyone must do. Yeah, I do think it's a common thing that not being able
Yeah.
to accept that this is actually not my fault.
Yeah. And you said something really powerful. And I want to focus on that for a second because when you said it is because of this that I've messed everything up,
Mm,
you know, and there is a lot of guilt that comes with being undiagnosed for a long time because you try to navigate a world that is not fit for you. And when you fail, you hit yourself really harshly.
mm.
So, how has that changed for you since your diagnosis?
It still comes up now and then, I'll be honest. The guilt and the shame of not being in some sort of highly successful career. And, my parents didn't really have an education and they came here and their thing was always, we're going to get her the best education possible. And there's a lot of pressure to succeed. And I was slash am actually really smart. So at the beginning of, school and academic career, everything was kind of on track. And then it started to change. And wait, what was the question? We were talking about guilt and shame. Classic. Yeah, it was kind of like I'm also an only child, by the way. So all of the pressure is on me to become successful, to make sure that, I can take the burden from my parents and all of these things. And I didn't do that. I couldn't do that. Although now I'm not angry at myself for it. I understand. I'm kind of empathetic towards myself, if that's a thing. Um, and I don't have so much guilt and shame. And I think whenever I do go into that kind of feeling of like, oh my gosh, imagine how much easier my mum's life would be right now if I had been able to be successful and have a proper career and all of that stuff. I remind myself that I still have a lot of life left where I can have a so-called proper career and where I can become successful, and that even if I didn't succeed in the classic way, in the way that, most of my family have, I have been through a lot that would have broken most people, I think.
Mm.
And even accepting that has taken a lot of therapy, because I've always just been like, yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal. I've lost my train of thought again. This is yeah, so yes, the guilt and shame is a lot less now. It still comes up every now and then, but I can just remind myself that it won't always be that way. And I can be proud of myself for different things that aren't related to career success or academic success.
There is something that for me is very obvious that, and there is a gap, I believe, when it comes to the diagnosis, and it's the acknowledgement of culture. Like when you assess how a child behaves in certain circumstances at school, like culture plays a pivotal role because in some cultures, like I can talk about my culture. I'm from Italy, so Catholic and all that jazz. Like I went to a nun school, so you can imagine like
Yeah.
the rigor that you had to adhere to. And that plays a role because not only you can't be yourself, you can't show up as yourself, but it's kind of like the environment that you're in dictates for you to mask.
Mhm.
So when it comes to diagnosis, to kind of ask, but if it hasn't impacted certain areas, well, you're probably looking at the wrong thing there. Like, have you taken into consideration all the different variables? And that's probably very scientist of me from the background when you're like, you're not looking at all the different variations here. But I think there is this current gap in the diagnostic process that doesn't acknowledge that the culture aspect of how things affect you and how you mask to just be part of that culture.
Yeah.
What do you think coming from, you said you're Indian and but you were born in the UK. How does that reflect on your story?
So culture, or me and my identity, I think, has always been a point of friction for me. I am Indian and I was born here in the UK, and I grew up in a place where there were not very many brown people. And I think that is a whole battle in itself, just on its own. When I was really young, I was painfully shy, painfully shy. I think I'm introverted, but then I can also be not sometimes. But what I was very, very shy. And there's also this thing of being a good girl, which lots of women have in general, and then you add the cultural aspect on top, and I'm sure you can imagine from being in a nun school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the things that were deemed to be good girl did not correlate to what I thought was good girl, or I didn't realize I was doing something bad, but I got told off for it. The strong sense of justice has always been there, and I would kind of say things or speak up or be very obviously irritated and frustrated by
Mm.
something being wrong. I'm too young to understand certain things and family dynamics and things like that. But being told to not say those things, or being, the amount of times I heard sort of, no one else says anything. Why do you have to say it? Or why do you have to be the one who makes a fuss? It conditions you to then just not say anything. And at the same time, the ADHD means I say things before I can process the fact that I shouldn't say
Yeah.
it in that moment. So there's this constant mess of wanting to say something, saying it by mistake, sometimes do, sometimes don't, then the shame and, feeling like I shouldn't have said that. And it all, the cultural thing, it's so complex that I can't I don't know how that would be weaved into an assessment. I just don't know how. I mean, even my experience as an Indian child of immigrants growing up in a town where lots of people it's completely unrelatable. And someone else's experience if they grew up in a town full of Indians where they don't have to worry about that extra added thing of I don't fit in. I'm not like
Mm.
everyone else. I don't, I come to school after the summer holidays and everyone's like, oh, what did you do? I did this and I did this. And I'm like, I spent the whole time in India and I don't know how to explain to you what we did because you will laugh at me or you won't understand or you've asked me if we live in a hut. There's just so much added. There's just a whole extra added layer of not being accepted. And
Mm.
in the background, there's the neurodivergence where you feel different from everyone anyway.
You touched briefly about how were you as a child, that you were very shy. So, do you want to expand a little bit more on that? How were you growing up? How were your relationships with friends and like up until the point where you got your diagnosis?
So when I was very young, I was very shy. I was so quiet. I was so intimidated by everything. And even growing up, and maybe even still now to a certain degree, I'm different. I mean, I think most people are different around their family than they are with everyone else. But I think maybe if some of my family hear this, they'll probably be shocked to know that I don't speak up outside. My family is a safe space. I can say whatever I want and they'll still be here and they'll still love me. So there's a disconnect there between how I would be able to speak up around my family and just be a bit moody and, all of the things that I would completely suppress outside of my family. Because if I'm myself, if my moods change, people won't like me, people won't be my friend. And friendships have been difficult in general, I think, because I d- I didn't even fully know who I was and I didn't know what the problem was. I knew that I was uncomfortable all of the time. That's the thing that I knew. I knew that I was trying to be like other people to fit in. I knew that at the same time I couldn't keep up with people in the same way as other people did. I knew that I mean, I think it sounds a bit depressing, but I think mostly everything about my childhood led and fed into very low confidence and self-worth, even if I didn't necessarily present that way or people didn't necessarily know it. And so I have friendships that I didn't feel like I deserved them. I didn't feel like I
Mm.
belonged there because everyone else was amazing and I was just pretending. Um, yeah, and my friendships have changed a lot in the last few years, even pre-diagnosis. I think it happens a bit as you get older anyway. That thing when you go to your 30s and you're like, I know who I am now. So I had like two phases of that. I had that when I turned 30. I had that maybe like another little step when I got divorced. And then the diagnosis was kind of like the end of not the end, but the finishing of that whole process for me of finding out who I am, of fully connecting to who I am.
And how was the work experience for you in all of that? Like, you said you wanted to be successful, but how did the ADHD, despite the fact that you didn't know you had it, helped you in that pursue? And how did it make you struggle?
So the struggle, I think my struggle was classic masked neurodivergence struggle. It was not being able to do the things that people found easy. or that I thought should have been easy, not being able to do those things, but being able to do things that people are like, wow, how did you do that? Or how did you think of that? Where did this solution come from? Being able to stay very calm when things go very wrong. And I had that thing where, when you first start something and you are amazing, like the first 3, 4 months where I'm learning was like, oh my gosh, I'm so good at this job because it's new and you're just obsessed with doing the new thing. And eventually that would get boring. I didn't realize it was getting boring. I just thought
Mm.
I was becoming terrible at my job. And I don't know, I didn't know why. I think that the struggles were classic. There was also, in the more corporate type of roles, that thing of, okay, I would do things according to what I think is important. And I would be told sometimes, but if this person asks you to do something, just do that first. And I'm like, that makes no sense because that thing is not important, but this thing is important. And the hierarchy and the politics of navigating that whole thing and feeding people's egos sometimes. And I definitely struggled with that. That definitely held me back, let's say. Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed a lot is that many of us with late diagnosis or not, like neurodivergent in general, I would say, they've had lots of interesting careers, like the sum of like 20 lives compressed into ones. So how many roles did you have in your life?
My gosh, you're absolutely exposing me right now. I don't even know. I think 10, maybe, which, I now think of that as a good thing. Yes, it
Hmm.
would have been nice to have a lovely straight line career where I do something and I progress and I get successful in that. But the jobs that I've had have taught me things, have taught me so many different types of skills. I was a youth worker. I worked at a special needs school. Whilst I was working at special needs school, I got into baking as a hobby. And someone asked me one day if I sell my cakes. And I was like, yeah, I didn't even think, I was like, yeah, why not? And that was it. Now I have a cake decorating business. That's how that started, from that one flippant yes from me. So I started doing both of those things at the same time. And eventually in that job as working at the special needs school, I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and I was getting injured all the time. And the doctor was like, all right, you can carry on, but it's probably not great for you. And I was sort of like, yeah, don't worry about it. I've got a cake business. So fine, I'll just go and do that. And that was it. All of a sudden, I'm self-employed. And I have to say this one thing about my parents, despite being Indian immigrants coming over here, hoping that their kid has a very successful career, probably becoming a doctor or something like that. They have always, always backed every single thing that I've done. When I said I want to quit work and just bake cakes, they were both like, yeah, cool. That's fine. And sometimes I don't know if it's been helpful or not helpful. If
Hmm.
I had a bit more push to do something, would that have helped me? But ultimately, as much as they couldn't completely let me be who I am because of all of the conditioning and all of that stuff, they also at the same time did let me explore and do things differently and didn't necessarily force me to go down the same path as everyone else. And I think that matched with my ADHD making me constantly change jobs and do all these different things. Um, it's kind of given me, I think I have like deluded optimism. Every time I start something, I've been very optimistic about it. Of course, this is going to work out, and I can see the future, and this and this. And considering the amount of times it didn't work out, I think most people wouldn't have that anymore. That deluded optimism would probably, or rather, the optimism would have gone away. And maybe that's why I call it deluded optimism, because I have no evidence to say that this is going to be fine. And yet here I am, and I'm doing this new thing, and I, again, cannot remember the question that you actually asked me, but I think it was how does ADHD, how has it like affected my career path in
Yes.
general? And I think that's it. So the negative has been the classic effects of ADHD. The positive has been being able to just do something new with optimism and almost without fear. I'm not scared of
And
changing things.
I think it's really powerful what you said about your parents, because you mentioned this before when you said, I feel safe with my family. So, of course, my true self, I can speak up. While normally I wouldn't do that. And that, I think it's what they've allowed you to do without shame, without guilt. And it is crucial because we carry a lot with us, despite what we have around us, what people tell us. We carry our own guilt and shame. So for you to have somebody that supported you along the way, it is really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk about was exactly that. Like, how did you judge yourself when you were young? And how has that changed after your diagnosis? And you mentioned, difficult relationship as well. So, how is that link? Because I know for myself that the lack of self-esteem, the fact that you're constantly thinking, it's me, like I can't do this, why can everybody do this but me, like that shows up in
Mhm.
personal relationships to the point that you settle, and you don't just settle for something that is below what you're worth, but you settle for something that it's hurting you. And I've done this many times in the past when I was young. So I've wanted to know if it was the same for you, and how can I frame it? How did you heal from that? If you've ever done that.
Okay. I healed from that with lots of therapy. Number one, I don't know.
You and I both.
Yeah, I don't know how I would still be. I don't even know what state I would be in if I hadn't had therapy at multiple times throughout my life. So you asked how I judge myself or how I used to judge myself. And
Hmm.
it was it is that thing of why, everyone else can do it. You're so dumb. You're so stupid. You're so annoying. You're so this and this and this and all of the negative things. And every from a tiny mistake to a big mistake, you're such an idiot. Why don't you just do this? And why can't, and it's almost like having two brains at the same time, or two versions at the same time, because I did that, and that was, I think, dominant. And at the same time, I was always had these like a little dose of, "Oh, but it's okay. You're still doing your best," or but look at this thing that you did, or don't worry because you know how to fix it. I have to say that is one thing that I really have appreciated about myself, even before the diagnosis, is that I have so much faith in myself to be able to fix things. Again, I don't know if that's deluded or not, but that's the one unshakable thing. I just always have had this thing of, okay, this has happened, like this has gone wrong. What am I going to do about it? Almost, I think it's just not been an option that I don't do something about it, or I don't figure it out. So that's helpful. I definitely don't judge myself that way anymore. It's the best thing to come from my diagnosis and the coaching that I had afterwards, is that I fully accept that things that have happened I don't think I'm not absolved of responsibility, but it's just the understanding of, okay, well, this is why, and that's okay. Like, it's all right that you did that, because you didn't even, you were coping and you were doing your best with what you had available. And with relationships, there's a lot of stuff about how people with ADHD end up in relationships with very narcissistic people. And there's the whole thing of how the beginning of your relationship, the way that you begin a relationship, narcissistic person is love bombing, ADHD person is obsessed because it's new and it's so exciting. And it's, you know, and I think I block myself off from being this way now. But historically, I'm an absolute romantic. I love everything about love and, was part of me. And so of course I ended up marrying someone like that. There is so much there of what I was accepting. It was almost like, well, I don't think I actually deserve to have someone who does all of these things, or I can't even think of a thing that I realized or that I thought I didn't deserve. It was like, if you don't think much of yourself,
Hmm.
you will not think that you deserve much either, and you accept a lot that you wouldn't necessarily accept if you did think highly of yourself. And I also had this thing of, I'm cool, I'm chill, I'm low maintenance, like, yeah, don't worry, don't ask for anything. Don't ask for anything. Just accept the thing that you have. This person, it was interesting for me because my married an English person. And what I realized in therapy is that when I was with his family, it was the first time ever that I could fully, I say fully, mostly fully be myself. There was the weight of expectation that comes with being an Indian girl was gone. There was no, I don't know, I'm expected to be able to cook every single day, or they didn't have any expectations of me. They just took me as I am. I had never experienced that before. So that played into this thing of me thinking, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And I didn't realize how much of my relationship probably was based on me feeling really loved by his family. It's probably not the reason to get into a relationship or to get married, but that's how it happened. There's all of the people pleasing behavior and the wanting to be really understanding. That's been a problem for me forever, not just
Hmm.
in relationships, in every situation ever. And I studied psychology and I'm really interested in things like that and figuring out why someone does something, or the idea that just because I know why someone did something, it doesn't mean I have to accept it, blew my mind. I didn't understand how, but if I know why they did it, then surely I have to accept it and be nice and understanding and help them. And that leaves you nowhere. There are no boundaries there. There's nothing. It means people can do whatever they want to you, and you will just be very lovely and understanding and sweet.
I feel very deeply about everything that you said because for most of my life, I thought that I was unlovable and that people would eventually go and leave. And that's what made me accept a lot of things that weren't supposed to be accepted. And as you said, like it took me years of therapy to get to the
Thank
point where
goodness for therapy.
yes, and or as my best friend calls them, like your paid best friend. Um, the like for me, like I even went a step further. Like now, I don't have any contact with my birth family because I've realized how much that relationships were hurting me because there was no understanding and there was a all asking, like constantly asking. And as you said, it takes the time where you realize that no, you should put a boundary there. That's not okay. And for me, that realization came with the diagnosis because I started to relearn about who I was, really getting to know myself, really getting to know what was hurting me, what was good for me. And then I decided to like just cut off what was really painful. Yeah, I think there is it's something that I see a lot that when somebody gets a diagnosis later in life, there is all of a sudden this light bulb that comes up. And you're like, but what about this aspect of my life? Maybe I should sort that out too, because now I understand this about me a little bit better. So that's why I was nodding a lot while you were talking, because as I said, I felt it very, very deeply.
Yeah. And I think that there's another thing with relationships is that it's really common, I think, for people with undiagnosed neurodivergence to always be in a relationship. And maybe this isn't a fully formed thought yet, but it's almost like you're looking for co-regulation without knowing
Yeah.
that that's what you're looking for, and just help maybe,
You need an
support.
anchor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's an anchor, but you don't realize that that's what you're doing. So now, I mean, right now is the first time in my life that I have not felt a partner missing from my life. I've not felt like, my God, when, like, where, like, Jesus, when am I going to find someone and, just someone to stay with and da da da. I don't have that deep, deep longing, and I would love it, don't get me wrong, but I have no none of my energy is going on making that a thing. And it's because for the first time ever, I feel like I can actually be okay on my own. I've never had that before. There was a point when I thought I wanted to be a housewife. Are you joking? Me? What do you mean? I would be in charge of doing the laundry all the time. That's a terrible, terrible idea. But why? So why did I think that? It's because work was too hard. I hated it. It was causing so much friction, and I did not believe that I would be able to find something I love, be successful, be able to create my own stability. And so what's the next best thing, especially as an Indian girl who's everyone has been talking about her getting married since the day she was born. You think, oh, it's fine, I'll just find a husband and I'll be a housewife and that would be okay. You couldn't pay me to be a housewife now, I want to
Yeah.
pay someone else to do those tasks. I don't want to do so. The undiagnosed space, it leaves you open to getting into relationships for the wrong reason a
Mm.
lot, I think.
Yeah. And there is another thing that I wanted to discuss with you, which is you shared that you were diagnosed with the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And, for those that are listening and they don't know what it is, do you want to give an overview of what that syndrome is and how has it affected you and how living with it alongside ADHD shaped both your identity and your capacity?
Yes. So I hope that no doctors come for me with my explanation. This is my understanding of it, is that it's a connective tissue disorder and there are different types of EDS. My type is hypermobile, which is the most common, and my collagen structure is different to someone who doesn't have EDS, and it affects every single thing in your body because we are made of connective tissue, essentially. And it's interesting actually because I had the EDS diagnosis for about 10 years before my ADHD diagnosis, but during that time, well, I have a really bad memory. Okay. It's just, I mean, we get it now, but before we couldn't understand. Like even my family, it was a running joke and at the same time a source of great frustration and also, you know, just having conversations with people and seeming like I wasn't listening, but actually it's just because I don't remember anything, babe. Like nothing. So there was a point when I'm like, well, there's connective tissue in my brain, so surely my EDS is affecting that, and that must be why that's why my memory is so terrible. And we know now these things are actually very highly connected.
Yeah.
So the EDS diagnosis was had, I think, growing up, went to the doctors quite a lot with just these little injuries or this really hurts and don't know why. And it got to a point where it was always, she's very delicate, like it's growing pains. It's almost like a doctor telling a 7-year-old child to man up because she's in pain. It leaves you in a space where you just don't think about it. You just don't bother anymore. You don't talk about it. I fell between the train and the platform. I fell in the gap. They say mind the gap. I did not mind the gap. I went to step onto the train and I stepped into the gap. That bruise was my entire thigh. And I didn't go to the doctors for 5 months because my knee was still hurting. By that point, it was too late. And so now I have lifelong additional knee pain because I had gotten used to just not talking about it, or not trying to get help. And those things do shape you because you're very quietly suffering,
Hmm.
but you won't accept that you're suffering. And so you just keep going and going and going. And I remember a distinct moment where my husband and I were walking to work and I said, oh, it's more painful than usual walking today. And he was like, what do you mean more painful? And I'm like, more than usual. And it took a little while for us to get there. He couldn't understand what I was saying. And I was like, why don't you understand? That was the moment I realized that that's not normal for you to be in pain when you walk. That was after my EDS diagnosis. And even then, I still had not accepted or understood the gravity of this thing that I am in pain 100% of the time and other people are not. That moment even blew my mind because I was like, what do you mean it doesn't hurt when you walk? I can't imagine it, obviously, because I've never had it. And I think now, especially now, knowing about the ADHD, and I have always kind of beat myself up for having low energy or not being able to necessarily do everything or whatever. And now knowing how much how much more energy I use every single day to do anything, it makes me just be much nicer to myself. And I'm much better at listening to my body and being able to just rest and not feel guilty about it. I think that's actually one of the big things. I rest and I don't feel like a terrible person whilst I'm doing it.
And, there are um, emerging research around the co-occurrence of ADHD and other chronic illnesses, particularly in women, because of course we won the lottery, the genetic lottery with that. So in that respect, what do you wish, as somebody that has lived at that intersection, right, and continues to live it, what do you wish clinicians, employers, and even families understood about living with these two conditions, so with ADHD and a chronic illness?
Think so from a clinician perspective, I have some hope. So I know a doctor, Dr. Stephanie Barrett, who is working hard alongside lots of other doctors, also in the NHS, to try and make it so that these things are not thought of as individual conditions. And when you see one thing, you question or look for the other things as well, which is really important because if I think about it, 10 years ago when I got my EDS diagnosis, someone could have thought maybe she's got ADHD as well. You just do a quick, like a screening thing. And that would have given me 10 years of knowing that, 10 extra years of knowing that I have ADHD and being able to adapt my life to it. And I don't know what the value of that is. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like, oh, well, if I did that, then maybe I wouldn't be here speaking to you. Or there's always that thing of, would you change it? I don't know, is the answer. The thought of it, though, is really nice. The thought of knowing and having had an
Yeah.
extra 10 years of less stress, less masking, more time to know myself, more time to connect with people as authentically as I can now. There is value in that. We don't know where my life would have ended up, but I do know that that sounds really nice. And I think in terms of kind of work and family and friends, it's just that understanding or giving space to be. One thing I have to say about my friends and about my friends really is that I can cancel things and it's okay and don't feel, they don't make me feel bad. It comes with understanding and that also comes from me being able to explain. Um Yeah, it's just space, understanding. There's no way for someone to relate because they don't experience it, so it's very difficult, but just believe me when I say I'm tired and it's not because I've done something that I shouldn't. It's not because I went raving last night, it's because my knee hurt so much I couldn't sleep properly or, just believe people when they say they're in pain or when they say something is happening to them. That's probably good advice for just generally across the board in society with most things. Yeah.
And I promise that we will go back to it. So I'll go back to as a last thing as you suspecting that you're also autistic,
Yes.
because it's kind of like the same journey that I'm taking. Like it started with ADHD and I was like, oh no, no, it cannot possibly be that I'm ADHD. And then slowly realized that after my diagnosis, like my traits, my autistic traits have slowly started to ramp up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because of age as well, because I'm turning 40 this year. So, there is a lot of hormones involved with that
Yeah.
as well. But like, I'm now at that point that I'm like, maybe. So maybe I should believe my instinct again that is telling me something. How was that realization for you? What brought you to think that this might be the case for you as well?
I think it was a very slow realization. It came from, I work with people who have ADHD, and so I'm constantly reading about it. I'm learning things. I'm going to webinars and this and this and this. And the more you learn something, the more you can see it, the more you can see if it's happening, right? And so I have had lots of little moments where I'm like, God, why am I so annoyed about this? And then I figure out, it's because the thing changed, and it changed very suddenly. And what do I relate that to? It doesn't feel necessarily like an ADHD thing for me. It feels more like an autistic thing. The People kind of describe it as having two different sides and two different brains in one. When I do something, I want it to be so perfect. And I always thought the perfectionism came from avoidance, from, oh, if I just don't try my best, then no one can say that I didn't do good enough because I know that I could have done better. I always thought it came from that. But now I'm like, no, actually, I've dealt with a lot of that stuff in therapy, and it's still there. So what is happening? And I don't know if perfectionism is the right word, but this need to have everything in order is there. And the disruption I feel in my body when something changes very suddenly is there. And my reaction to it is not always the same, because I'm also very adaptable. And I'm like, yeah, don't worry, we'll just see what happens. And I think my ADHD feels dominant. And I think it really pisses off my autism. Like, really, it's so annoying, because I'm like, oh, okay, I've got this plan, I'm going to do this. And then ADHD comes in and it's like, we're just going to do whatever we want. It's more exhausting than I realized it was. And I've not necessarily thought about getting a diagnosis or anything like that, which in itself is really nice, because I can accept that I think I know this thing about myself. I'm still exploring it, I'm pretty sure, but I don't need someone to tell me this thing. I know enough about it. I know enough about me and my reactions and my feelings and thoughts and all of those things to just be more aware of it. And it's really helpful, because now when I feel myself getting annoyed, weirdly, I can most of the time be like, okay, but just take a second. It's because of this. And it's made everything better. It's made my relationship with my mum a lot better, because I get it. Mum is an extrovert. She does not stop talking. We live together and she's very loud. And sometimes I'm just like, I can't, there's so many noises all at the same time. And I just need to take myself out of this situation, and I have the language to be able to explain it to her now. Or if I do get very frustrated, I can explain it to her afterwards, which is very helpful. And it reduces the guilt from being mean, maybe, to someone.
One last thing is, to somebody who's listening and, they're going through either the diagnostic process, or they're just thinking that it might be their journey, like the neurodivergence acceptance, what would you say to them?
I would say to people, be aware of the way that you speak to yourself, because it's the most important change that I've been able to make. And I think it's really tempting to say, start doing tiny things to, support the way that you are able to manage your life. Try different systems, and you don't have to wait until the diagnosis to start changing things. And that's true. But I genuinely believe that if until you can fully accept that this is not your fault, and it's not because you're lazy or rubbish or messy or unambitious or this or these, all of these terrible things, until you can accept that, doing the systems and the tools, it can almost be more damaging, because you'll do it and it might work for a bit and then it doesn't, or it might not work at all. And you internalize that as your own failure, which is a dangerous place to be. You're just going in on that negative reinforcement all the time. So until you get to a place where you can try something, have it fail, and not beat yourself up for it, I would just say, just don't even worry about it. Don't get the planner. Don't get the whiteboard. Don't think about how you speak to yourself first and how you can accept. And really, even if you don't get a diagnosis, that's still okay. It's just who you are and how you are. You accept it, and then it becomes much easier to adapt your life around that.
It's really powerful, the thing that you just said, the way you speak to yourself. And one of the things that I read this on the internet once, like, what if the words you use were showing up on your skin? How would you feel? And it's an exercise that I had somebody to do in coaching. Like, every time that you say something to yourself, either stick a post-it on yourself with that exact word or write it. Like, literally, like, write it on yourself and see how you feel at the end of the day. Because once you see them, and again, this is because in our brain, like, it sits separately. So
Mm.
to kind of connect the two things, our thoughts, with the impact that it has, because it's not physical, the object permanence makes it a little bit difficult to work on. But once you make it visible, once you make it like anchored in reality in a different way, like, the person came back and was like, I didn't like the experience.
What, you don't like beating yourself up 10 times a day? What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, imagine having it written all over you, like, instead of a tattoo, all the bad things that you say about yourself. It's, yeah, not a
Yeah,
pleasure thing to
no.
do, but
That's a
yeah.
great exercise, by the way. I can imagine it being very powerful.
Well, thank you so much, Dhruti. I really enjoyed this time together. It's been fantastic. It's been exactly what I want from a conversation, which is going deep, overshare, like everything that I love.
Tangents, not being able to remember the question.
Yes,
In a classic
exactly.
ADHD, I think.
You can feel when two like wired minds get together. It's a recipe for success, I would say.
And it's fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
The Spacious Brain podcast will come back soon with a new episode and new stories to share. So stay tuned and follow me now, before you forget.